Okay, hello everyone. We're going to get started. Hi in person, and we have folks joining us online. My name is Lisa Gilardi. I work for NOFA, Massachusetts, and this is crop planning for sustainable vegetable growing with Pam Dawling. Crop planning for sustainable vegetable production with Pam Dawling. Sorry about that. We're going to get started, but I have a few slides to run through with you first. So we are presenting this conference on land that was inhabited by the Nipmuc people prior to European colonization. As we work to heal the destruction caused by colonization, we appreciate your support, solidarity, and continued learning. To learn more and honor those whose land you now occupy, visit nativeland.ca. We recognize that our agricultural system is built on stolen land and the forced labor and exploitation of stolen Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Our conference aims to help to address this harm and bring equity to the food system. You can participate in our BIPOC and White Ally Caucus groups this weekend. There's more information on the Whova app and in your printed program. I want to say thank you to all of our sponsors who help make this conference possible. And we also have an auction going on. So if you'd like to bid on any of our amazing items, you can go to go.rallyup.com/NOFA winter auction. The information is also in the printed program. And now I will turn it over to Pam. Pam has grown vegetables at Twin Oaks Community, Central Virginia for 30 years, feeding 100 people from 3.5 acres. She is the author of Sustainable Market Farming and the Year-Round Hoop House. She is a contributing editor with Growing for Market magazine, a workshop presenter, and a weekly blogger on sustainable market farming. Hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, and hi to people online. So crop planning for sustainable vegetable production. There's still a couple of paper handouts if anybody wants one of those. Otherwise, it's online. My two books, Sustainable Market Farming and the Year-Round Hoop House, are there to look at. I'm not selling books this weekend, but if you want to look at them, you can. And as Lisa mentioned, I have a website, and I do a blog post there once a week. I've been doing that for many, many years. So there's a lot of material there. You can go there and search for information about growing vegetables, or you can sign up and get an email every week when the post arrives, or you can see it on Facebook as you prefer. And oh, yes, I've got the writing a bit too high up on my slides. I didn't know there was going to be this bar across the top. So, so I live and work at Twin Oaks Community in Central Virginia, and it's U.S. Hardiness Zone 7A, which I know is different from where you are. And I've got a couple of slides to show you the difference. Our average last frost is April 30th. Our average first frost is about October 14th. And what we do with our vegetable production, our reason for doing it is to feed about 100 people year round with a wide range of tasty vegetables. If you want to know more about the community, there's a website, twinoaks.org, and you can go there and read up about the community, see pictures, but I'm not going to talk about that, just the vegetables. I live and work on the ancestral and traditional territory of the Monacan Nation, who lived in Louisa County, where I live, and other parts of Central Virginia before white settlers arrived in the 1700s. And I'm doing this land acknowledgement as a way to help fight obliteration of Indigenous history. And what we're going to talk about today is about using crop planning so that you can produce crops when you want them and in the right quantities, sell them where and when you need to, and support yourself with a rewarding way of earning a living and also taking care of the soil in the process. So I'm going to cover why do any planning, how to plan, and the step-by-step. It's actually a 12-step program on planning. And then at the end, I have a lot of resources. They're all on the handout. If you have a handout and you want to sort of flick through it and see what's already there, you'll see what you don't have to write down because it's already there for you. So why would you do crop planning? Well, you can do the planning in the winter, and then you don't have to stop in the middle of the growing season to figure something out. And you can make the most productive use of your land and your time and your resources by planning ahead. You can also pace yourself and enjoy your life more. You won't suddenly be taken by surprise of an extraordinary amount of labor required if you've planned ahead. You can reduce stress and confusion, and you can become a better grower by knowing more what you're at. You'll have crop records, and it is a way of investing in your future because the planning will get easier each year. You can use the plans from the previous year to plan the next year, and it takes less time. I have a very slight cold. I'm being careful. So if you're selling crops, the market rewards are that you can earn a living this way. You can have the satisfaction of looking at those full CSA bags or those groaning market tables. And you can enjoy having a great reputation for having what your customers want. And also for knowing, like, when's the broccoli going to start or the cucumbers come to an end, those sort of things. And you can also use planning so that you can achieve a balance of, like, having every week having some leafy crop, some root crop, something brightly colored, something strongly flavored, something filling, that's those sort of things. And get best use out your opportunities. Before you start any steps of planning, though, it's good to be clear about what your goals are. And I think that this book, The Market Gardener from Jean-Martin Fortier, explains it really well. He and his wife, Madeleine, they wanted to figure out how much money they needed to support themselves. And they raised 2 children, I believe. And they figured that they needed to supply the equivalent of 220 CSA shares for 20 weeks. They're in Quebec, so it's a shorter season. They wanted to provide 8 to 12 different vegetables each week. So they choose their vegetables based on what the demand is and the financial value of those crops that they're growing, and also the practicalities of growing. Their entire small farm is 160 raised beds, some of them undercover. And of those 160, 35 of them are in salad mix. They grow an incredible amount of salad mix. But that only takes 45 days in the bed, and then they clear the bed and they can grow another crop. So they get more income from the bed that way. Now, as I said, I'm in Central Virginia. It's pretty different from Quebec, and you're in sort of in the middle. We don't want 300 pounds of salad mix every week. 100 people don't quite want that much salad. And we want to provide for 52 weeks. So my goals are 52 weeks of food for 100 people. Jean-Martin's was 300 pounds of salad mix each week, 220 CSA shares for 20 weeks. And what you do will be different again. So make sure that you're clear about what your goals are before you start making those plans. Here's my planning circle. This is on the handout. If you are selling crops, you will be advised to start first with the money, to think about how much money you need to earn, as I showed in that example from Jean-Martin. And then think about which markets you're going to sell at, and then think about which crops you're going to grow. If you're growing for your household and you don't need to sell anything, you could just start with which crops you want to grow. But you still will need to think about time efficiency and space efficiency. So although you won't need to be thinking about the money, because presumably you're not selling to your household, you will need to think about other aspects of efficiency. And then the next place to move is to think about what you want to harvest when. You don't want to think, oh, I just really want to grow lots of different kinds of lettuce and just go out and start planting lettuce. You really want to think about how much lettuce you want to harvest each week and how many of the 52 weeks of the year you want to be harvesting lettuce and how much each week, for instance. So you make a harvest schedule and then you work back from that to figure out how much you need to grow to meet your harvest goals. And then you make yourself a planting schedule, working out the sowing dates you need to do that. And if you're growing transplants, as I expect you will be doing for quite a few crops, you'll need to work out a seedling schedule as well. And then you will need maps of some sort of where everything is going to get planted. Make sure everything fits, make sure the dates work out, all that sort of stuff. I've got more about some of these steps coming up, most of them. And then I have some tips on how you can pack more in if you are short of land, or if you want to reduce the weeds by not leaving any of it empty for very long. I've got some tips on packing more in. And then the 10th step is to step back from it all, take the overview and see if there's any way you can tweak your plan before you start work on it, tweak it to make it even better. And then it's a good idea to have a notion of what you might do if something goes wrong. Have a plan B. And then think about how you're going to keep records so that you will be able to learn from the experience of this growing season and have a even better plan next year. So I recommend doing a crop review. We do our crop review in November when we're popping the garlic. We plant our garlic in November in Virginia. But whenever you do it, popping the garlic into separate cloves is a nice group activity. And it's a good time. You've got a crew sitting around. You can take an alphabetical list of the crops that you grew and talk about each one and what worked and what didn't, so that the next year you can make some improvements, if there's space for any improvements. Also gather information from your extension service, eOrganic, ATRA, and then in the resources, I've got a lot of places that I found really good information. Also ask other local growers nearby. Tools for planning. Choose a system of planning and record keeping that works for you. There are lovely web-based systems, but if you have dreadful internet like I do, which fades in and out, and there's not much you can do about it, don't choose a web-based system because you will find it very frustrating. You won't be able to look things up when you need to. So think about whether you like spreadsheets or photos or clipboards. Some people don't even want to do spreadsheets. They just want to have a sort of worksheet where they write things down and do it that way. You don't have to use the all bells and whistles latest thing. What you do need to do is something that works well for you, that you can understand, that you can quickly enter your information in and retrieve it when you need it. And do build in the ability to adapt your plan when the conditions change, because not everything will go according to plan. A plan is just a plan. I went to a talk once where the speaker said, good luck comes to the well prepared. So the people with plans are more likely to be able to adapt when situations change, because you know what your plan actually was, and you may even remember some of the other things that you considered and decided not to do at the time, and they may well work for plan B. This is worksheet. If you like worksheets, Cindy Connor explains worksheets in her book, Grow a Sustainable Diet. These work better generally on a smaller scale, although there are commercial growers who do use worksheets, so you can do it. Cindy also has a DVD and CD set. There's also the Crop Planning for Organic Vegetable Growers, Canadian book. They have downloadable forms on their website. If you just want worksheets, you can borrow somebody else's. You can borrow theirs. This is an example of a worksheet that we use. This is what we call our colored spots plan. This is our permanent raised bed area. It's a map of it. And we use a different color pen for each kind of crop family. So the carrots and celery are all in a sort of faded orange color, for instance. And so when we're doing our planning, this is a very easy visual way to see if, did we have nightshades there in the past 3 years? You can quickly see if you did or not, rather than have to troll through a lot of words and numbers. So we put the colored dot down for the crop we're going to grow first in the season, and then if that's going to be followed by another crop in the same season, we put another colored dot. So some of them you will see every time there's a vertical line, they're blue on there. That is kind of the start of the new year. So between one vertical line and the next are dots for the crops that we grew in that bed in that year. So sometimes we have 2 crops in the bed at the same time, and that's where you get 2 dots, one above the other. It's a funny little system, but we've been using it for decades and it works really smoothly for us. So it doesn't have to be a spreadsheet, and it doesn't have to be something online. It can be something like this. And in that permanent raised bed area, we do some of our crops that way. We do much bigger area we have for row crops. But in the raised beds, we grow anything that's like just small quantities. We've actually given up growing celery, but when we did, it was like a third of one of these beds. We didn't grow a lot of celery. Also early crops we do in the raised beds, because we can get in there sooner than we can till up the flat areas, the row crop areas. We use the beds for short-term crops, like all our lettuce planting happens in these raised beds. We just keep moving around. Anything we need to fuss with, like eggplant, because of flea beetles, need extra attention. We do that in the raised beds. We have to net them. Anything that's experimental that we want to keep an eye on, like when we did variety trials of eggplant, we did that in the raised beds anyway, even though it would have been in the raised beds because of the flea beetles. Yeah. Also, when we get to the other end of the season, the overwintering crops. I don't know how much overwinter. You probably can do kale and collards and spinach and yeah, all those good things. Leeks, you probably can. Those things we do, all those in our raised bed, because then that leaves us the ability to put decent cover crops in, plenty of good time, winter cover crops in the row crop areas, and just focus all the things that we need to harvest and take care of in the winter in the raised bed. It's much more accessible. Spreadsheets, if you want to do spreadsheets, we do a lot of spreadsheets, you'll see some. You can copy other people's. What we do is, as I mentioned, we have computer connectivity issues. We prepare the spreadsheets when we do our planning in the winter, and then we print them out and we put them on a clipboard in the shed, and we just write in when we actually sowed something, when we started harvesting it, or when we transplanted it, when we finished harvesting it, if it was a success or not. We just write those things in. And that's, for us, that's the easiest way of keeping records. So it's spreadsheets to figure out what we want to do, and then it's writing in what we actually did. And that combination works well for us. One reason I like to do spreadsheets is because when you're planning, and you can sort the information, like if you want to know more about all the different lettuce plantings, you can sort it alphabetically by crop, and then you can go to the L section of the alphabet and you can see all the different lettuce plantings that you plan to do, and you can make any adjustments to those. And then you can resort the whole spreadsheet by date so that you know when you're supposed to be doing what. So we like it for those reasons. Johnny's has some spreadsheets on their, or spreadsheet tools on their website, if you don't want to make up your own. And then we get to the online crop planning systems. This is a relatively small one, small scale garden planner. It would, I think, work nicely for like a hoop house planning or something, or if you've just got a pretty small garden or a small number of crops. And there are bigger online ones. Ag Squared is a well-known one. There's Cog Pro, which is particularly good if you're organically certified, because they've arranged the questions that they ask you to answer will help you prepare for your filling out your organic certification forms. There's another one called Tend that was for $100 a year, but I think that's a pre-pandemic number actually. But it's a good one if you've got good Wi-Fi, good internet, and all that. You're not back in the Stone Age. So the next big question is how much money you need to earn to make your living from farming. So think about what your living expenses are. Be very realistic. Think about what your farm expenses are, and also add in things, money you will need for your retirement, for your kids' college fund, or your loan repayments, rainy days, they do happen. Yeah, the federal minimum wage. Well, it's gone up in some states on January the 1st this year. It's gone up like 15 in some states, but others, there's a few states that are still down at $7.25 an hour. Now, you just want to be thinking about how much you're earning from this, if assuming you are doing it to earn yourself a living. You can, of course, choose to work for less than the minimum federal dollar per hour, but you can probably only do this and live in the real world if you've got some other source of income, because the prices of the things you want to buy will have gone up. If you have some other source of income, you can make it work. Or if you've got one farm partner who has an outside job, then you don't need everybody to have an outside job. The next step is to think about which markets you're going to sell at. If you're a new grower, you might think twice about a CSA. CSAs are wonderful in that the members, customers, will pay you a community supported agriculture. Sorry, use the acronym without the, community supported agriculture. This is where you become a member of the farm and you pay at the beginning of the season, you pay a fixed, they do vary a bit, but often you pay a certain amount of money and then you get a box or a bag of produce each week. That's great because the farmer gets the money ahead of time and they also know what the demand is likely to be. But it is a bit harder than just doing a farmer's market, because if you go to a farmer's market, you can take along whatever produce you have and put it out on the table and hope that you sell it. You don't need to have 100 cabbages all on the same day necessarily, which you might want if you're doing a CSA. Just keep those things in mind. And if you've already been like interning at CSA farm and you know all about how it works, then I wouldn't stop you at all, because I think politically it's a great model, having the community support the farm. But it might not be practical if you're brand new. We already mentioned off the farm jobs. It's enough about that. So the next step is where you do decide which crops you want to grow. So you need to think about which ones suit the conditions. And in your handout, but not up here, is the cold hardiness table that I've made of outdoor killing temperatures of different crops. And you can modify that to take account of thick row cover or caterpillar tunnels or high tunnels or whatever you kind of protection you're using. Think about which crops are more profitable. Outdoor tomatoes are not always as profitable as you might hope. Also think about which crops you can sell at high prices, making sure that there is enough demand for it. It's no good everybody growing the most expensive thing. I think that's what happened to the cannabis bubble, really. Everybody thought, oh, I'll sell that, I'll get rich, but not everybody's going to get rich. So you can also think about which crops are easy to grow so that you do grow some things that you can quickly grow and sell. It's also good to think about vegetables that you can store. And this gives you a kind of insurance, a kind of what you can do to, if 1 week you don't have as much stuff, you can bring out more from storage. And when you do have plenty of stuff, you can leave the things in storage. Swiss chard is a bit like a growing example of the same kind of thing. When you want some greens, you go harvest some Swiss chard leaves. And when you don't need it, you just leave it growing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When you see one of these red boxes, this tells you about some other slideshows that I have. I put them up on slideshare.net. So you go to that website and you put my name, Pam Dawling, in the search box, and you'll see little tile icons for the different slideshows that I have there, and you can watch the ones that you want to see. You don't hear me talking, but you can watch the slideshow at your own pace and as many times as you want. Yeah, so I have one about cold hardy winter vegetables. I have one on diversifying your vegetable crops. I just want to skim back to the beginning because I think there were some slides that I missed. Guess not. Maybe they come later. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh, they're right here. Great. Right when I needed them. Okay. So this is the northeastern US. You can see what winter hardiness zone you're in. And as I said, I'm in Virginia, which is just in the northeast, according to the USDA. So I'm in zone 7A. I'm also experienced. I grew vegetables in the north of England up on the Yorkshire moors for 10 years. So I'm not just a softie. You may think I'm a southern softie, but I know about cold weather too. So this is this. And I also, here's some great, this is from weatherspark.com. It's a very fun website. If you haven't already been to Weatherspark, you should do it. And on the opening page, you put in your zip code and it gives you lots and lots of very well planned graphs. This is the one for where I live in Louisa. And you can see that our temperature is generally from 29 Fahrenheit to 89. And it's very rarely below 5 and rarely above 97. And on the winter solstice, we get 9.5 hours of daylight and we get about 7 months frost free. And yours is not actually as different as I expected it to be. So this is Worcester. And your temperature is generally from 19 Fahrenheit to 79. It's rarely below 4, which is only 1 colder. And it's rarely above 85, which is definitely cooler than it sometimes gets in Virginia. And you get just over 9 hours of daylight in the winter. And I did notice that driving up here. I said, oh, it's 4:30. It's starting to get dark. We're going north. It really shows. So you get half an hour less. And your frost-free period is just over 6 months. You probably knew all those things because you were all growing. But anyway, go to Weatherspark. You get information about rain and snow and wind and tourism, which they count as a kind of weather, which surprised me, but it's interesting. There's lots there. You can have fun on a rainy day. The next question is, which crops suit the conditions? So there's a Market Farming Success. This book here, Growing and Selling Local Food, Lynn Wazinski, and she talks about needing a diversity of crops. You can't just grow kale and sell kale. Well, it's unlikely. You could make a success of just selling kale. You need a diversity of crops, and you need not just the earliest things, you also need critical mass for the whole of the season. And she recommends growing what yields well for least labor, what sells well for the highest price, and what fills gaps between your major crops. So this is a very valuable part of planning, is to see, okay, I've got the garlic scallions and I've got the stored roots and we're off to market. And then what comes next after that before you start getting the summer squash and cucumbers? So think about the gaps. Some crops are more profitable than others. Sometimes that's money per area or money per hour. And this is Clifton Slade. He was at Virginia State University, and he has had a project called the 43,560 project, which is how to earn $43,560 from 1 acre. And as you may know, 43,560 is the number of square feet in 1 acre. So he's trying to see which vegetables will earn $1 per square foot. And the answer came out, a lot of leafy greens do really best of all. You need like 1 head of cabbage or 1 stalk of something or a pound of produce per square foot to earn this sort of money. So that was an interesting way of looking at it. He's not much, he's fun as a speaker, but he's not much of a writer. I wish he'd written a book about this, but he hasn't. Richard Wiswall has written the Organic Farmer's Business Handbook, and he found that some outdoor crops like kale can do quite well. But for him, field tomatoes didn't do so well. And some crops, especially the peas and beans that you take a long, long time to harvest, they came in at a loss. So think about that. You can work out crop enterprise budgets. Vern Grubinger in Sustainable Agriculture, Sustainable Vegetable Production from Startup to Market. He explains how to do this. You're not working out the total costs of growing a particular crop. You're just comparing one crop with another crop. So you leave aside all the overheads of running your farm, and you just compare the additional costs of growing broccoli with the additional costs of growing beets, for instance. So he says, make a crop journal, write down how much work you do on each crop on each day, including bed prep and cultivating, planting, staking, mulching, and then also record your harvests, the weight or the count of each crop, the time you spend harvesting and cleaning it, and the money you raise from each crop each week. And that way you can compare the value. Well, you can do this at the end of the season, because once you've already planted a crop, you're not going to pull it out just because it's not earning you the most. At the end of the season, compare the costs and benefits of growing each of the crops. This is dollars per square foot. This comes from Ben Hartman, The Lean Farm. So it's probably a little bit out of date by now, but this is the crops he grew. He's in Indiana, I think. Yeah. So it could vary a lot. You can see the range here. He got $19.25 for a pound of heirloom tomatoes. He got $1 a pound for bulb onions. So use that sort of information to help you decide what's most worthwhile. Here's some crops that sell for high prices. They're not necessarily easy to grow. So don't just choose this, don't just take this list and run with it. Think about other aspects. This is from Lynn Basinski's Market Farming Success. And I have got a slideshow called Diversify Your Vegetable Crops. You can see more about other options in there. So unusual things do sometimes earn you a high price, but salad mix does too. So does lettuce. Edible flowers always do well. Anyway, there's the list. This is a list of which crops are easy to grow by my rating. I started off with Steve Solomon's list from one of his books, and then I had too many disagreements, so I was spending too much time saying, but I can do that easily, and but that's really difficult for me. So your results will vary. This is what I find in Virginia. So what's easy is a lot of the brassicas. Okra is easy for us. Lettuce is fairly easy. The heading Asian green, more brassicas. Spinach, the Irish potatoes and sweet potatoes. The cucurbits are easy, although they die pretty quickly and we have to do succession plantings of those. Scallions, tomatoes, arugula, parsley, carrots, radishes, kohlrabi, turnips, and Chinese cabbage. They all do well for us. They're really pretty easy, but I have had some challenges with eggplant, flea beetles I mentioned, and also getting them to ripen if we have an indifferent kind of summer. Peppers, parsnips, really the main problem for me with parsnips was people didn't want to eat them. They grew quite well. They take a long time to grow, but people didn't want to eat them. Broccoli, if it rains a lot. Potato, onions, they're a lot of fun, but if they get too wet, too damp, they're going to rot. Garlic, it's a bit harder. Leeks, asparagus. Definitely difficult where I am, or difficult for me, is the bulb onions, celery, celeriac, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cantaloupe. We do still grow some of those things, but they're things we need to keep an eye on in case something starts to go wrong. Yes, it's worth thinking about including some cut flowers in with your vegetables. Maybe you, like I have, you have the goal of like feeding people with good, healthy food, but people will pay more for flowers. And Mark Kane in Arkansas said that 50% of their growing area is in cut flowers and 50% is in vegetables, but the cut flowers bring in 75% of the income. It's sad. People want cheap food. You know what that's based on? The horrible history of not paying people who grew our food, perhaps not paying them at all or not paying them much. So that's the legacy. And now you'll find that people will pay more for cut flowers. So you might want to include some cut flowers to make your life easier. Sometimes there are reasons to include crops that don't bring in the highest income. I already mentioned filling gaps in your sort of crop portfolio. You also will want to think about crop rotation of the soil so that you keep your soil healthy. And you might want to think about providing crops at times of year when fewer growers are supplying them. And as Lynn Basinski said earlier, critical mass for the whole season. So that may mean grow a lot of storage crops, so that if you're selling crops in the winter, grow a lot of storage crops, even though you may be not most excited about growing millions of carrots. They're very useful and they will help you have sales in the winter. This step is how much to harvest. So the average person eats 160 to 200 pounds of fresh vegetables a year in the US. We do hope our customers are better than average, of course. The average CSA share is made to feed 2 or 3 people. And therefore, an annual share, if you're doing a CSA, will be about 500 pounds of vegetables for 40 to 50 different vegetables if you're trying to cover the whole year with a once a week distribution for 8 months and a once a month distribution for 4 months. And you might well choose a different distribution season than that. It's up to you. You may want to go skiing in the winter. The next step is to figure out your harvest schedule. So you need to think about what crops you want to harvest when, how often, how many times a week, and over what length of time, and how much each time. And so write that all down. It's no good, like I said, about our cucumbers, for instance, the plants themselves don't last all that long. We get a lot of fungal diseases in Virginia. And so we have to plant cucumbers 5 times, not including the hoop house ones, which are the first ones, 5 times outdoors. Yes, 5. We do. But it's worthwhile because they're not that difficult to plant, and then they crank out the cucumbers. So you need to know how much you need and how long for. And if you're doing a CSA, you can then make a share schedule, which is that you don't have to publicize it if you feel like you might make too many changes. Although that is educational as well for people to realize that not everything is going to be ready when you think it might, or sometimes there's a crop failure. So it can be educational to tell people that, or you can just keep it to yourself. This is what I'm hoping to provide. And you can have week 1, week 2, week 3, and so on, what you hope to provide. And then you can multiply that up. You can add in a margin for things going wrong if you like. I usually do, although Ben Hartman in the Lean Farm says, don't do that. It's just planning to grow food that you don't have a plan to sell. And I can see the logic in that, but at the same time, I'd rather have a bit extra. And so then you will end up with a list of everything that you hope to harvest each week that you're harvesting. And this is the start of our harvest calendar in date order. It doesn't really end on December 31st and start again on December 1st, but calendars do. We do harvest a lot of crops in the winter also. So the lettuce will be coming from the hoop house in January. We harvest that daily as needed, and it is most days. We are harvesting some lettuce or some mixed salad. Garlic scallions, I'm not going to go down the whole list, and this is only takes us to the beginning of June. We harvest our garlic on the 5th of June, roundabout. It's been getting earlier. Yes, so some things we'll be harvesting daily as needed. Some things will be twice a week, some things 3 times a week, some things once a week. You work out what will work for you and make a plan. I mentioned storage crops and the wonders of them. And here's a very happy crew cleaning up carrots. So you can store lots of these root crops without refrigeration in the winter. And you might be able to use some of the buildings that you use for other purposes during the main part of the growing season. Of course, you don't want to freeze solid. So in sustainable market farming, I have a chapter about storage, but here I'm just going to mention on my chart on the next slide. I think I took it away. Oh, I did. Never mind the chart on the next slide. It's not there. So there are 4 kinds of storage conditions, and one of them is just for white potatoes, sometimes called Irish potatoes, but we all know they're really Peruvian. So one of those conditions is just for that kind of potatoes. And then so if you've got these 4 kinds of storage conditions, you can store at least 24 different kinds of crops. The first one is the cold and moist. It's like a refrigerator. It could be a refrigerator. It could be one of those cool bot spaces. It's all the roots and the greens and the leeks. We'll all go in that kind of condition. Then there's the potatoes. And then there's cool and dry, which is really for your garlic and onions. So 32 to 50 Fahrenheit, 60 to 70% humidity. You could store your garlic and onions. That's not refrigerator. And then there's the warm and dry, or perhaps warm and fairly moist. And this is going to be sweet potatoes and winter squash. So that's going to need 50 to 60 Fahrenheit, 60 to 70 percent humidity. So they could be basement kind of spaces. Yes, so this is in my book, Sustainable Market Farming. So when you think about how much you want to grow, the next step, once you figured out what you're going to harvest and where you're going to keep it, how much you want to grow to achieve your harvest goals. So you need some yield numbers. So I have a table in Sustainable Market Farming, and this is the first part of it. So the first section is how much to grow for 100 CSA shares in pounds and feet, and then how much in kilograms and meters. Life is so much simpler in metric, everybody. And then over on the right is what we have grown at Twin Oaks for 100 people year round. So 52 weeks and 100 people. And sometimes it's very similar. 100 people for 52 weeks can be similar to 100 CSA shares for a smaller number of weeks. Sometimes it's very different. You'll notice we've given up growing arugula. We just didn't have enough people who liked it, so we stopped growing it. Heresy, I know. Some things we grow a lot of, like we do broccoli in the spring and the fall, and we have a crew that prepares it for freezing for our communities. So we grow a lot more broccoli than you could eat fresh. So that's why some of the Twin Oaks numbers are pretty different from CSA. Oh, these numbers. These are great. This is comparing several different sources. And I know I'm one of them, but there's 4 others. Different sources. This is not well, you could try doing a search online because you probably can't read it. It's very small print. This was at a workshop at Oak in Kentucky that I went to, and their handouts were on flash drives. I loved it. So you could try Googling or some other search, DuckDuckGo. Yeah, you might be able to get that. Yield figures. There's the rest of it. And so then, as I said, most of our crop is not in permanent raised beds. It's in 3 patches of row crops. It's not textbooky at all. We don't have the same row length as you're recommended to do in each of the areas. We've got one area with 180 feet, one with 200, one with 265. We do the initial cultivation with tractor and discs. We have a manure spreader for compost, a seed drill for cover crops, and a potato digging machine. Otherwise, we're using a walk-behind rototiller or people with hose. And we use a 10-part rotation, a 10-year rotation. It's not 10 years between sweet corn and sweet corn. We grow so much sweet corn because we love it that sweet corn appears 3 times in a 10-year rotation. But there are, it's a 10-year plan that rotates the crops. So if you want to figure out a permanent rotation, you want to have worked out how much area you want to grow for each of your major crops, the ones that take the most space. And then you need to map the land that you've got. And I'll show you a couple of different ways to do that. Then you divide the space up into roughly equal plots that will each be big enough to take your major space hogging crop, unless it's enormous, in which case it could be half of that. And then you group together compatible crops that don't take as much space to fill out a plot. And so when we did this, the space for our major crops, this was the result. The ones in pinkish red are our major ones, major spring planted potatoes, summer planted potatoes, fall broccoli and cabbage, winter squash, and watermelon. And they all needed between 7,000 square feet and 9,000 square feet. So we knew from that if we made plots of 9,000 square feet or more, we could fit any of our major crops into the plot as the rotation moved around. And these other ones, we would combine them to fill out a plot. So this is our east garden. The plots are between 9,275 square feet and 10,600. They didn't end up being the same. They started out the same, but then we had, a couple of beds of strawberries here, and we've got that wavy edge on the east side. So you can do this. We did this with a tape measure and a pencil and paper, but you can also do it online these days. You can use Google Earth Pro. So you download and install that version. And then you can put that on a slide in a PowerPoint slideshow, which lets you superimpose blocks. You can draw them in, and then you can turn it to a PDF and keep it. So this was their farm, 14 100-foot beds broken up into 7 blocks, really. So you go to the Google Earth thing and click to keep the bird's eye view. You don't want to be looking at your farm from a sort of worm view. So you don't want to tilt it. So you zoom in and you click on the corners of the area you're looking at, and that shows you the shape. And then you can click on the measurements tab, and you can set the area to whatever units you're using and get suitable resolution, and then import the maps into a PowerPoint. And then you can add in the blocks like you saw in that example. And when you're finished, you can turn it into a PDF and keep it forever. So we divided ours up, as I said. We were using a tape measure, 2 people, 3 flags in a line, and try and get a straight line. That's the way we did it. You can do that. We got 10 plots of 9,000 square feet plus. So we thought, oh, let's try for a 10-part rotation. So then we looked at grouping together the lesser but still big crops, and so that they would use about the same area. So we put 2 or 3 corn plantings together in a plot, so they'll be side by side when we grow them. This picture here shows over on the left under that row cover, we've got newly transplanted broccoli. I think this is April probably. The broccoli is on temporary raised beds with mulch, hay mulch. And then right ahead in the photo, we've got our garlic, also on temporary raised beds with hay mulch. And then over on the right, we've got the aforementioned strawberry beds with the row cover at the ready, which is why I think it was April, because I think it means we've got flowers at that time. So this works well for us, not just space-wise, but also because when we get to within 3 weeks of harvesting that garlic, we need to remove that mulch. It gets humid and muggy where we are. We want to clear away everything that is stopping the airflow. We want the garlic to dry down nicely. And around about the same time, we will have moved the row cover off of the broccoli and taken it to some more tender crops. So we go through first, we weed the broccoli, we drop the weeds on top of the mulch, and then we go through the garlic patch with our wheelbarrows. We gently pull in the mulch and the weeds from the garlic beds into the wheelbarrows. We go down to the bottom of the patch, make a left, come back up one of the aisles in the broccoli, and we top up the mulch around the broccoli because it's going to get really hot where we are. And extra mulch on the broccoli is going to keep the moisture in better, keep it tasting sweet for a bit longer, and it's going to clear the mulch away from the garlic, which we really need to dry down. So we do that. We've also done big planting of paste tomatoes together with peppers. Oh, I said tomatoes. Sometimes I say tomatoes and sometimes I say tomatoes. So it goes. Resources on yields. Sometimes seed catalogs have these. Sharing the Harvest, that CSA book, or John Jevons, How to Grow More Vegetables. He has lots of tables. You probably have to multiply them up because it's for small areas. There's lots of resources on yields in the handout. Next, when you think about figuring out your sowing dates, you need to know about days to maturity. So when you need to sow to meet your harvest needs. So look in the catalogs and make sure you know, is that seed to harvest or transplant to harvest? And then you work back from each of your target harvest dates and get the planting date. However, there's a couple of snags. One is that those dates and the numbers in the catalogs are for when spring conditions are perfect for that vegetable. So if you're starting extra early in the spring, when it's colder, it will take longer to grow that crop. So you want to add a couple of weeks and also make sure that you are growing fast maturing cold hardy varieties. In the summer, things will mature faster than the catalog dates. So you can take off perhaps a week. And then when you get late in the fall and growing slows down again, then you need to add back some time. The difficult bit is if you're growing something through the winter and you're hoping it's growing, when temperatures get below 40 in the daytime, nothing is really growing. You can't, it's unknowable how many days like that you're going to have. Weather Spark can give you some idea of how many days like that you might get, and you can treat those as non-days, really, days when nothing happens, or you just have to. It's a guess. It's a guess, but a guess is better than no guess. Also, days to first harvest. Those days to maturity in the catalogue are all about bragging rights, and it usually means days to first harvest. And if you're feeding your family, it's okay to get one eggplant. You can share it. But if you've got a CSA with 100 members, one eggplant isn't going to go very far. So you really want to know when you're going to have a lot of eggplants. So add a week or two to be sure of having plenty to everybody. The next thing is to decide which crops you're going to sow and which ones you're going to transplant. So That decision will affect your starting date. Some things you might want to grow are not going to be available as transplants, especially if you've got your eye on particular varieties. If you want organic plants, there's even fewer available, although it's getting better each year. This is a money versus labor trade-off. You will spend more buying transplants, but you will save yourself some work. Also, if you don't have the equipment to grow the transplants, that's not an option, is it? Don't assume you're going to sow seed if you don't have like a greenhouse or an indoor germination space. The pros and cons of direct seeding: it's less work than transplanting. It's less money buying seeds than it is buying starts. You don't need a greenhouse. The plants have better drought tolerance because nobody messed with their roots. Even the best of us transplanters end up doing a little bit of root damage when we transplant. Better drought tolerance, yeah, because of that. Some crops don't transplant easily, although once you're skilled, you can transplant anything. I would say almost you can transplant anything, but you wouldn't want to transplant carrots, would you? Too many, too fiddly. So don't do that. The disadvantages of direct seeding are that it uses more seed. Just look at our carrot bed there. And it uses a lot of time thinning. We don't have one of those nice Jang seeders. We're using one of those very handy dandy push along. What are they called? Earthway, thank you. Yes, the name escaped me. Earthway seeder, yeah. So also your crops will be in the ground for longer if you direct sow, which means that they could be harder to get started compared to in a greenhouse if it's cold or if it's very hot on it. Yeah, also. Transplanting pros and cons are you can start earlier than you can outdoors, so you can get earlier harvest, which might translate into more money. You are starting the seed in more ideal conditions, which you get a better germination rate, and it's much more fun being in the greenhouse when it's really cold outdoors. And it's easier to care for a lot of little seedlings in a small space than it is out in the garden. You can also, when it comes to transplanting, you can do some crop selection. You can plant the sturdiest plants and throw the others over your shoulder or eat them. Yeah. So you're only planting the best, and so you will get better yields that way. If the weather turns really bad and you're planning on doing transplants, you just hang on to them for a little bit longer. If you need to, you can bump them up to bigger pots if it's going to be a couple of weeks. You can fit more crops into the season outdoors. Like you can grow some lettuce. When that's harvested, you can grow another crop. When that's harvested, you can grow some more lettuce, maybe, or some arugula. Yes. The disadvantages of doing transplants are that it takes extra time caring for the starts because presumably you have to go and make sure they get watered several times a day. Transplant shock can delay harvest, but you're going to learn to get good at that, so that won't happen to you. And once they're in the ground, you do need to pay attention to watering them initially. At least, well, not just initially. So you might want to transplant crops that you want to get an earlier harvest, tender crops that you've given indoor protection for a bit longer. Also, like for us, tomatoes, we want to grow 2 plants of this variety and 3 plants of that variety, 5 of something else. It's much easier to do them as transplants than going out to the garden and pushing a couple of seeds down and a couple of seeds down 2 feet away. If spring is cold or wet, you can transplant things that you might not have planned to. Like we transplanted all our winter squash one year. It worked out fine. It was just, the soil was impossibly wet. And so we just said, okay, we'll sow them in pots and transplant them. Yeah, you can do that. If your garden space is limited, transplants help you grow successions of summer crops. Like if you're growing transplants and you're going to put them out when they're 4 or 5 weeks old, during that 4 or 5 weeks, if it's mild, if it's beyond the frost date, you can grow buckwheat or mustard or something for 4 or 5 weeks, and then that helps. Transplant age and size. So this varies a bit. So with the cucurbits, 3 or 4 weeks old is good. Sweet corn, you can transplant sweet corn up to a certain size. Some things it varies according to the time of year. Like with brassicas, 6 to 8 week old transplants are good in the spring. But if you're sowing growing transplants and for the fall crop, you don't want to let them hang around that long. 3 or 4 weeks is enough before you set them out. The real slow pokes are the alliums, the onions, and the leeks, and also celery. It takes 10 to 12 weeks for them to grow to transplant size. So be prepared. Don't expect a miracle. So you worked out all those things. You figured out what you need to plant when. So next you make a field planting schedule of all the crops, like either the ones you're going to direct sow or the ones you're going to transplant. All the dates, all the varieties, all the row lengths, where it's going to go, and all the rest. And then I recommend leaving in a column space to write in if it was successful or not. It's great if it was successful, you can just put a big check mark or a smiley face or something. But if something went wrong, it's really useful to write down what went wrong, like bad aphids from March the 1st or whatever it was. Write that down so that next year you can be better prepared. Here's a bit from the beginning of our 2014 planting schedule. You can see we've got the column when we intend, the date we intend to put it out, the date when we actually did. Sometimes that's different. It's good to know if it's quite different so that when you're wondering about the results you got, you can see why. The crop, the variety, how many row feet. For transplants, how many plants in 100 feet. And then what the in-row spacing is, the space between the rows. We don't always write it down, where you're going to find it, where you're going to plant it. And then that plant column, you see it's a bit bigger than the actual number we need. This is the number we want to take out to the field with us. So if we've grown extra in the greenhouse, we don't need to take them all out with us if we've got way more than we need. But we do like to take some extras so we can throw the most puny ones over our shoulders. Step 7, when to sow for transplant. So this next step is working out your seedling schedule. So figure that out. I've already told you the information of roughly how long it takes to grow the crop to size for transplanting. And the catalogs usually will have some advice on that too. So then you make yourself a schedule, seedling schedule, pretty similar looking to the field planting schedule. We do this one in stripes so we don't do the wrong thing. Yeah, self-evident, I think. This is the chart of days to germination at different soil temperatures. And I think this is in one of my books. I've forgotten which one actually. I think it's in the year-round hoop house. So you can see from this chart what's just too cold to try to get any germination. So a soil thermometer is really worthwhile tool to have. You can see what temperature the soil is. And if it's just too cold for something to come up, just wait. Or if it's going to take 42, 45, 51 days at that temperature, you might wait. Although you're not going to have, hopefully, spring will warm up and you won't get 42 days at 41 degrees in the soil, because by the time you get to a couple of weeks later, it will have warmed up a bit. So this is also useful if you have sown something and you're waiting and it doesn't seem to be coming up and you wonder if you've waited long enough and you need to jump on it and resow, or whether you should just be more patient. So this information is in this chart too. Here's our East garden again with the crops filled out. So this is what you do next. You figure out where you're going to plant things. So start with the major crops, fill them in first. And then remember your crop rotation. Put in the smaller crops that you're going to squeeze in. I have a whole slideshow about crop rotations, crop spacing. Once you know how many cabbages you want, figure out the crop spacing. You need that for that field planting table chart. Some things you might need to think about when you're thinking about your spacing that might move you away from whatever the standard ones that you get from the catalogs. Do you want big carrots or small carrots, or does it really not matter to you? It might matter with onions. You can get the most tonnage of onions from an acre if you grow them fairly close together and they're like 2 inches across. But are people going to buy 2-inch diameter onions? So if not, don't grow those. You might want to think about disease control, humidity. We have to think about that quite a bit. You don't want to plant really, really close together if you've got bad problems with fungal diseases. Think about how you're going to cultivate. Are you going to use a tractor, or is it raised beds that you're going to be hoeing by hand? Are you going to be using horses? You need long rows with gaps. Also think about your irrigation system. If you're using drip tape, how many runs do you want to put in a bed? And how will that work with the crops that you want to grow? It's better to have fairly long runs of drip tape, but not so long that the water never gets to the far end. Here's the thing, and this is about planting density, which brings you to the 2-inch onions. So it is actually the area per plant that's the important bit. And in this photo, you see 3 rows of Morris heading collards in a 4-foot raised bed, and they're kind of 16 inches apart in all directions. But often you will find information is given this much between rows and this much in the row. But you can mess around with those to suit yourself. I remember reading an article by someone that was growing leeks, and he wanted long rows of leeks with a wide spacing in between, which is very different from what we do. So he had the leeks actually kind of 1 inch apart in the row, and then like 3.5 feet to the next row or something. And it's not what I would choose, but it worked for him. So you choose what works for you, and make sure that you're giving them enough, I was going to say square footage, square inchage each. And if it's a big plant that's sort of, you might just want to have a single row in one of the beds with the plants fairly close together. This is what we do for eggplant and okra, make a hedge. Yeah, but here are some numbers. This has a row spacing, an in-row spacing, but you can kind of multiply and redivide. So if you want to grow beets for early harvest, they're recommending 7 inches in between rows and 4 inches in the row, which is 28 square inches, which is a lot of space for a beet. But if you want to grow for early harvest, you do need, this was counterintuitive to me, you do need big spaces so there's no competition. Beets actually don't do well with competition, even their own kind. So if they're early, give them a lot of space. For maximum total yield of beets, they've got 12 square inches. They've got them 1 inch apart, and these are going to be inevitably small beets. So you might not want to do 12 inches apart, rows 12 inches apart with beets 1 inch apart. You might want to do rows 6 inches apart and bigger space in the row. But you can multiply it up and see. These results mostly come from a book which is out of print, but they're not just, this is what I think you should do. They were actually scientifically researched. So this will tell you, if you multiply up, how many square inches per plant. And then we get to the packing more in, and we have to pack more inches at a time. So if you don't have as much space as you'd like, you can choose high-yielding varieties, which might not be the heirlooms. It might be hybrids. You can look in the catalog description for high-yielding or very productive, words like that. Of course, you also want to look at flavor and reliability and all those things. Using transplants rather than direct sowing will give your previous crop an extra 3 to 6 weeks in the field. You can sow several varieties of something with different numbers of days to maturity, and that will spread your harvest season. We do this with broccoli, we do it with sweet corn, and then you sow it all at once, but it saves you time. It doesn't really save you space, except that you haven't sown too much of something that's going to be harvesting all at once, and you haven't wasted any. Also, promptly clearing things out of the way when they're finished. I learned a phrase last weekend at the Virginia conference, end of life crops. So you don't want to hang on to your bean plants when they've got kind of 2 or 3 gnarly beans left on them. You want to pull them up and get rid of them and plant something else, including the possibility of a cover crop. Intercropping, relay planting. You can sometimes get more crops for the space if you've got 2 different kind of crops. In this example, the lettuce was planted on the shoulders of a tomato bed, and they calculated that they got 39% more efficiency than growing the 2 crops on separate beds. And we've done this with putting peas down the middle of a bed of overwintered spinach, putting peanuts down the middle of a row of lettuce. You've got to choose romaines, though. You can't have those really flat kind of lettuces, because the peanuts, they're slow growing, but maybe you don't want to grow peanuts up here. We've also grown okra in the middle of a cabbage bed, but you do have to take off the leaves of the cabbage that are going to push over the okra. But there are ways. Double cropping, also called follow-on cropping. This is a bit of that colored spots plan that I showed you at the beginning. You can see in many cases we have got one crop following another in the same growing season. Also think about fast catch crops. These are crops that mature in 60 days or less, and mostly they're greens. There's a few fast growing roots like little turnips. These you can use if you've got, like, if you've made your plan of what you're going to grow, and there's a period of time before you actually need to plant that crop, then maybe you could grow something else first and get more food from the space that way. We just did that this winter in our hoop house. We did some extra tatsoi and some extra Tokyo Bacana because we had space that we didn't need till December. So here's some crops that you can do this with. These are also useful if something is superbly successful and comes to early finish, and you've got space before you need to put the next thing in, or before you need to put the winter cover crop in. So you can plant these. Season extension, don't overdo it. Yes, it's worth remembering that it's much, much easier to get extra harvests in the fall from plants that you already have that have been producing and are still producing. If you just keep them warm enough for a bit longer, you can get a lot more. What's harder is getting crops extra early at the beginning of the season, because you're really battling the cold soil, the cold air, and the very, very slow rate of growth. So that way, if you think about season extension, think first about fall and second about spring. Well, don't forget the other bits, the winter and the summer as well. Yes, I'm going to have to speed through some of this. So season extension, yep. Learn how to germinate seeds in hot weather. We actually, when we sow lettuce in the summer, we know that lettuce is not going to come up with hot soil. We actually put little rows of ice cubes or crushed ice on top of the soil and then put shade cloth over the top. It really pops the lettuce in just a couple of days. It really works. You just want nursery seed beds. You don't want 100-foot rows. Otherwise, you have to buy a lot of ice. Netting is good to keep the bugs off. Insect netting, protect net. It's really worth. It costs quite a bit, but it's very sturdy.
I want to get you on tape saying that. I'm trying to convince our farmer to buy it.
Oh, it's really worthwhile because it's sturdier than row cover, provided you don't do something really silly like flame weed close. It lets the air and water through better than row cover. You can see through it, so you're not just going to be watering a load of Galansoga like I once did when we had our brassicas covered in row cover. It's easy to use. It's kind of flexible, drapeable. It's not stiff like some earlier kinds of insect netting. You want to use hoops so that the pests can't just sort of squat on the netting, which is touching the leaves of your plants, and lay the eggs through the holes in the netting. And you want to make sure you get the right mesh netting for the pests you're trying to keep out. Like if it's something small like flea beetles or thrips, you've got to get the netting with the small holes. But yeah, I'm a fan. Yes, all right. To determine the last sowing date for frost tender crops, count back from the first frost date, the number of days from seed to harvest. I've got an example on the next slide. The average length of the harvest period that makes it worthwhile for you. Like maybe 2 weeks is worthwhile, but maybe you really need 4 weeks to make it worthwhile. Add on 14 days to allow for the slowing rate of growth in the fall, and 14 days to allow for the horrible possibility of an extra early frost, unless you have row cover and you're going to watch the forecast and spread out the row cover. So this is Zephyr, yellow squash, our favorite. So it's about 50 days from seed to harvest, and we want to have at least 3 weeks harvest period. And we're going to add on 14 days for a slower rate of growth. But we're not going to add on the possibility of an earlier frost because we're going to have the row cover at the ready. And that comes to 85 days, which would, for October 14th first frost, take us to July 21st to be our last worthwhile sowing date. But we weren't satisfied with that. So we decided we'd just get the row cover out earlier, and we would use the row cover on cold spells, not frosty, but just cold. And so we actually do our last ones on August the 5th with the row cover. Oh, we talked about this. Yep. Yes. So succession crops. Yes. So crops grow faster at some times of year. So to get harvest starting an equal number of days apart, which you might well do if you're growing commercially, you need to vary the interval between one sowing date and the next. You need big sowing gaps early in the spring because the later planting will catch up. They'll mature faster than the ones you sowed earlier. And when you get to the fall, you need short gaps. This explains it better. As spring temperatures and day length increase towards the summer solstice, the time to maturity shortens, the later sowings catch up with the earlier ones. And then when you get past the summer solstice, the day length decreases, the temperatures decrease, the time to maturity lengthens. So you don't want to be late in your fall sowings. 1 day late in sowing can lead to a week's delay in harvesting. So yeah, I have a whole slideshow and I'm not going to talk about it now, except to say you can see it on, I'm going to skip over this. You can see it on SlideShare. What it is a graph making method. You gather your records, like crops that you want to have, like my 5 sowings of cucumbers. You collect the data of when you sowed and when you started harvesting and when you ended the harvest. From the 1 year, you use that data the next year to plan out a sequence of sowing dates that will give you more even harvest intervals. But we don't have time to do it. So this is an example with winter radishes in a hoop house. You can see that the intervals in the sowing date are very variable, and the intervals in the harvest start date are even, because that's what we planned. Yeah, it's very noticeable with sweet corn in the summer. This is real data, our real data. You can see we decided we wanted to have a new patch of sweet corn every 15 days. So we made lines every 15 days apart on the harvest start date axis, and we took those lines over to our graph line, dropped lines down, and we get very a progression of sowing intervals, 23 days between the first and the second, all the way down to 9 days between the fifth and the sixth. Yes, between the fifth and the sixth. It really works. Year-round lettuce, yep. So we do all our outdoor lettuce from transplants, and we sow twice in January, twice in February, every 10 days in March, every 9 days in April, every 8 days in May, every 6 or 7 days in June and July. And you can see where it's going. Every 5 days in early August, every 3 days in late August, and then every other day until September 21st. That's for our outdoor lettuce. And then for our cold frames, we sow in early September. For our unheated greenhouse, we plant lettuce in there in the winter. We sow in mid-September. And then we also grow winter lettuce in our hoop house, and we sow that mid to late September. I'm going to skip over that. So making your best possible plan, step 10. You look at the whole plan that you have and you see, does it all make sense? Can you fit in everything that you want? What we've sometimes done is we keep a little list of things we wanted to plant, but we couldn't find space. Or we keep a list of sudden little spaces that we found that we didn't have a plan for. Sometimes you can match them up. Check the timings on the seedlings and make sure you have enough germinating capacity. There's nothing more sad than planning to grow lots and lots of little seedlings and then finding that you can't actually fit all those flats in your germination chamber. Also, make sure it's physically possible to do all the transplanting in the time that you have allocated. We have done vast hand transplanted fall broccoli plantings, and we spread them out a little bit each late afternoon and evening. It's too hot in August to plant them in the morning or the early afternoon. So we're working late afternoon, early evening. And so we can only do a certain amount each day before it gets dark. So we don't sow them all at once. We have different sowing dates so that we can have different transplanting dates. So you might want to think about that sort of thing. Yeah. Gather up your information. Here's our notice board with all our clipboards and our spreadsheets and charts and so on. This is our task calendar. I've got a version of this on my website somewhere if you search for it, but it's basically a list for each month. We find this list with words as a refreshing change from spreadsheets with numbers, and it makes sure that we don't accidentally forget anything, because it includes things that are not on the planting and harvesting schedules, like what needs compost and what needs thinning and all that sort of stuff. No, we're not going to do that. What to do if things go wrong? Yeah, don't despair. Do some damage control. Get the cows out of the garden. Ask for help. Salvage what you can. Plant something else instead. One year, our potato patch nearly drowned, and I actually transplanted some potato plants. You can transplant anything, as I said. I transplanted potato plants from one end, from the wet end up to the dry end, and then when the wet end drained down, we just sowed a cover crop because we lost half of our potatoes, but we managed to keep half, and we had some roots in the ground pretty quickly in the other half of the patch. Write down what went wrong and why, and write down what you did and how well it worked and what might have worked better. Yeah, and so make your record keeping easy to do. Write down every day what you did. Don't lose your lunchtime doing it. Crop review meeting I mentioned. And here's a little tip that's worked for me. If you look at your records and you look at what actually happened and you think, oh, next year I'll do that a week earlier, just do it half a week earlier next year. And this will save you from wild pendulum swings because the weather is going to be different each year. And instead, you'll gradually zero in on the sweet spot, and then you don't have to mess with it again. So I do recommend that. Yeah. All right. So this is my website, sustainablemarketfarming.com. This is what it looks like when you get there. And here are my books. They're there. You can look at them. And the resources are on your handout. Slides on SlideShare. And there's the title slide. And I've got a very short amount of time for questions. Questions? I can also.
The weather spot,
Yeah.
where was that?
It's in the handout. Yeah, let's go back. Weather Spark. It's on the very last web resources. Weather Spark, the weather year round anywhere on Earth. It's just basically it's just weatherspark.com. So if you can't find it, just try and remember weatherspark.com, and you'll find it. It pops up. It's great. It's a lot of fun too.
Can you comment just super briefly, when you've squirreled away all this data all year long, and then your folks sit down and you process it, you make all your charts and you workflow.
Yes.
What is that like? Is it an intense week? Is it a weekend? Is
Oh,
it
yeah.
the whole winter?
All right.
How do you address that?
All right, so I better repeat some of the question in case the people online didn't get it. So he's asking about our crop planning process, and we do that in the winter, and we do 1 or 2 steps a week, actually, but we have them in the order that we need them figured out. So we do the crop review first, and then we work towards what we're going to change in our planting plans, and then we try and get the seed order done by a certain date, and then we're planning our seedling schedule, and then our bed. Incremental, yeah. So yeah,
it's not like a boot camp. Everybody sits down.
No, and although we try and get as many people as possible for the crop review meeting, the other steps are usually done by just a couple of people each, because not everybody is that interested in all of it. But it's really worthwhile getting the feedback from all the people that participated in the year, what happened and what worked and what didn't, because some people really notice things that others don't. It's very worthwhile. Everybody's valuable. Yeah.
Do you have tips for, because there's a lot of data in reporting like harvest numbers here, and just a lot of data about reporting when stuff's planted,
yeah, and
all sorts of things that you would be doing like during the season.
Yeah.
So do you have tips for how to do that really efficiently? Some
yeah.
Super busy. Like
yeah. Yeah. So as I said, we make the spreadsheets and print them out and have them on clipboards. So then when we finish the shift, we'll go and we'll write in the date. If we sowed anything or transplanted anything, we'll write that in. Or if we cleared a crop, and then we have a plastic label at the end of the row. We take that label, we have a success jar and a dismal failures jar, and we put the tag in the appropriate jar. We started out having success and non-success, but you really need quite different words on the jars, otherwise you can't expect people to get the right ones in. Yeah, just writing down just minimal bits of information on the day that you do it. We don't actually weigh anything because we don't need to, but we do record like our big harvests, like how many crates of potatoes, how many boxes of sweet potatoes, how many bags of garlic. We do record those things.
Or like bunches of something.
You could do bunches. Yes, I mean, yeah, you don't have, like, if your beds are all the same length, as I said, ours are not. If they are, you can just use beds as a kind of unit of area. You don't have to know how many square feet it is. You can just say, we got this many bunches of scallions from one bed, or this many bunches of carrots, or whatever. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
What factors go into your decision-making on varieties, seed varieties?
Okay, so what factors go into our decisions on seed varieties? We're always looking for good flavor. We're always looking for disease resistance. We're sometimes looking for quick maturing ones, or else, like when we do sweet corn, we want a quick maturing one, a middle one, and a slower one. And we sow the 3 kinds on the same day. So sometimes it's not necessarily the fastest is best. Productivity, we look, if it says high yielding or very productive, then that's a plus for us. we don't want small things. So I avoid anything that says mini heads. But mini heads might work for many other growers, because if you're selling to small households, they probably only want mini heads. But for us, bigger is better up to a point. Yeah. Is there anything else that might be other factors? Oh, it depends. Like, does well in hot weather is a good one for us. Like with lettuce for hot weather, I have to be really picky. You know, if there's a few like Jericho and New Red Fire, but mostly it's the Batavians. And I don't. If I'm getting a catalogue from the north and it says does well in summer, I take it with a pinch of salt, because it might not do well in summer in Virginia. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Another question?
Thank you.
Okay, all done.